Hi everyone, Emily B here. I am the owner and baker at Grandma B's Mini Treats, my home cottage baking business, as well as the pastry chef at Feast Food Co., a local restaurant here in Central Oregon. And today, in my home kitchen, we are baking a staple for every home baker out there, and that is banana nut bread. It is hands down probably my husband's most favorite morning treat. I bake it all the time. And the biggest fight we have about it is whether or not to add nuts or not. So I don't know how you all feel about it. Nuts are absolutely optional. I would prefer no nuts. But my husband insists. He actually will not eat it unless it has nuts. So today we'll be adding toasted pecans. Now this is a recipe, as you can see, I've been using for quite some time, and yes, I do also have it in digital form, so if I ever lose this, I'll still be okay. Now, with any baking recipe, and again, everything I'm doing, I may be a pastry chef right now, which is so cool. I am untrained, so I learned watching my grandmother. I learned by significant trial and error on my own part. You may disagree with some of the things that I do, so please do things your own way. I'm going to talk about the way that has worked for me over the years. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first thing I do with any recipe that I make is I gather all of my equipment and all of my ingredients ahead of time. This is also a recipe that you want to make sure your butter and eggs are at room temperature. Now, we're actually going to melt the butter and cool it a little bit, so having it super room temperature is not all that important. I just happen to find that it melts a little bit more evenly, maybe. I don't know. Seems to for me. So I do always go through and make sure I have everything ahead of time. Like for instance, this morning I was gathering everything and I realized I didn't have pecans for my banana nut bread, and that is verboten in my house to not include toasted pecans, so I had to run to the store. So not only is gathering all of your equipment and ingredients ahead of time a good way to prepare, it's a good way to make sure you actually have everything you need on hand. Now, if you don't have nuts, you don't need them. They're purely optional. My husband just will have an actual tantrum if I don't include nuts in his banana bread, because this is ultimately going to be for him. Now, in terms of equipment, mixing bowls, I have a sifter. I always sift all my flour to measure it as well. Whisk, measuring cups, measuring spoons, keeping my eggs, and as well as all my ingredients, which include flour, sugar, vanilla, salt, baking powder, butter, eggs, pecans, and a little bit of oil. You can use canola oil or vegetable oil interchangeably. Last but not least, the star of the show, overripe bananas. And I really like to use super overripe bananas. You can even keep these in the freezer. So if you've got bananas that have turned brown, but you're not ready to make banana bread or something else out of them, pop them in a Ziploc bag or a Tupperware container and put them in the freezer. You can take them out to defrost. They defrost fairly quickly. The only thing to keep in mind is they will have a little more water in them, a little more liquidy. It's not going to change the recipe dramatically. You can drain it a little bit. I still use them as they are. So don't toss these out. Pop them in the freezer if you're not going to use them right away. But the browner the better, way more flavor. And once I have all of my equipment gathered, then I start with the items that I need to have cool down a little bit. And in this case, that's going to include toasting about 2 cups of pecans and melting 6 ounces of butter. And all of this is going to be in the description. The full recipe will be in the description of this video. After I do all of that, I'm going to go ahead and start prepping the rest of the ingredients, including weighing and measuring flour, sugar, the whole bit. Let's go ahead and do it. Getting our 6 ounces of unsalted butter to be melted in the microwave. I'll put it in for about 1 minute at 50% power and then check on it to see if it needs any more time. Next, I will pop our 2 cups of pecans into the oven to start toasting. The oven is at 350 degrees. Next, I will measure our first dry ingredient, which is sugar. I'll measure 1 cup, about 200 grams. This will go into my KitchenAid mixer bowl, which will be followed by 2 of the unripened bananas, using a total of 4 ripened bananas. Now, if you don't have a KitchenAid mixing bowl, no problem. All of this can be done with a hand mixer or even by hand. It just takes a little bit extra arm strength. Now, once the butter is ready, we set on the counter to cool. We start getting other ingredients ready. Okay, we have our initial steps getting going. I have my 2 cups of pecans in the oven toasting. The oven is at 350 degrees. I did preheat it. You can pop the pecans in as the oven's preheating. They toast anywhere from 7 to 10 minutes. I check them after 5 minutes and keep checking them periodically, but ultimately you'll start smelling the toasted pecan smell, which of course is wonderful, and you'll know it's about time to pull them out. You want to be a little careful with those things because they can burn quickly, those little buggers. So as soon as you start seeing some get pretty brown, I would pull them out and we'll just let them cool on the stovetop when it's time. Now I went ahead and melted my 6 ounces of butter, unsalted butter. If you only have salted, totally fine. We'll just adjust the salt that we use down just a little bit. So whatever you got, use it. We're gonna let this cool a little bit while we get our rest of our ingredients going. Now, step 2, and this is a little bit different than other banana bread recipes. We are gonna put 2 of our bananas into our mixer along with our 1 cup of sugar, and that is about 200 grams. So this, once we get it in there, we're gonna whip for about 3 to 4 minutes. We want it to get, so there's no banana chunks, that it's very pale in color and almost a little bit frothy. Now, I know this is a little bit different than other banana bread recipes. I think other recipes go ahead and pop all the bananas in that you're gonna use, but we are not gonna do that. What we're gonna do with these 2, to save some hand washing later, once we put our butter in with our mixture, these are gonna get mashed up and folded into the batter at the very end. So you have a few little bits of actual banana chunks in your banana bread. Okay, and now this again is about 200 grams or 1 cup of granulated sugar. Once I turn this on, what I'm gonna go ahead and do is get all of my dry ingredients going, and I'll explain that too. By measuring my flour, I will sift it into a bowl on a scale to get approximately 250 grams of flour. This is not necessary. You can just fill your cup slightly and go ahead and use that. After sifting and measuring my flour, I will add my 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and I use a scant 1 teaspoon because I prefer not to have a very strong baking soda flavor. After that, the last dry ingredient we'll use is half a teaspoon of salt. If you have used salted butter, I would go ahead and reduce that to about 1/4 teaspoon. It won't hurt anything too much if you don't. It just might be a tad bit saltier. I'll whisk all of that together, check on my pecans, and then we're ready for the next step. Okay, our initial banana and sugar whip is just about done. I'm also going to go ahead and pull out our pecans that have been toasting in the oven. Just nice, just starting to turn a little bit brown. Let me let you take a peek here. I'm gonna let these cool on the stovetop before we go ahead and break them up. Okay. Now again, our sugar and banana has been whipping here for just over 3 minutes. This is the consistency we're looking for. It smells good already, just banana and sugar. But it is a pale color. It's there's very few actual hardened chunks of banana and pretty fluid. All right. Now our next step is going to add all in one go our 2 room temperature eggs, a teaspoon of vanilla, our 6 ounces of melted butter that has cooled just enough to be put into the batter, as well as a 1/4 cup of either vegetable or canola oil, whichever you prefer. Our 2 eggs, followed by our 3/4 cups or 6 ounces of unsalted butter. Next will follow our 1/4 cup of oil, and last will be 1 teaspoon of vanilla. We will beat all of this together until well incorporated before moving on to adding our dry ingredients. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and beat this all together. Probably take about 30 seconds to 1 minute so it's completely combined. We'll scrape down the sides of the bowl partway through just to make sure everything's Nothing's getting stuck on the bottom. Most important part is we want the butter and oil and the eggs to be fully incorporated. Keep this going here. So again, everything that we're doing here, you can do either with a hand mixer or frankly, just by hand. I've done it by hand before. And use a whisk, get your arm workout in, and then use a rubber spatula to fold and dry ingredients. Easy peasy. Okay. This is the consistency you want to have. So it's thicker than it was before, but there's no oil or butter separation, fully combined. Now, really, next steps are pretty easy. I'm gonna go ahead and switch to the paddle attachment in my KitchenAid. Like I just mentioned, you can use actually a rubber spatula going forward. Anything that is the easiest for you to use, I would go ahead and recommend. Now we're just gonna go ahead and add our dry ingredients in at least 3 parts. The dry ingredients consists of 2 cups of flour, about 250 grams, give or take. Just some lightly filled cups will be perfect. So 2 cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of baking soda. I'm always light on the baking soda. I don't care for an over baking soda flavor. So go light on your baking soda, no more than 1 teaspoon, and half a teaspoon of salt. And this is with unsalted butter. If you've used salted butter, go ahead and drop that salt down to 1/4 teaspoon. That's all this is. Whisk it together, and we're gonna add this to our banana bread batter in 3 parts. I don't worry about scraping down the sides of the bowl too much because we're gonna be folding in our final ingredients, our remaining bananas, as well as the toasted pecans, and you can capture anything that's on the sides or bottom of the bowl in that hand folding. You don't necessarily want to overmix this batter too much. So less is more. Okay, here we go with that. Let's go ahead and take a look. Use my rubber spatula here to not waste batter. You want as much banana bread as possible. Take care of that in a minute. And this is the consistency that we're looking for. So it's still somewhat pourable batter, but definitely thicker than it was before. And we're scraping off the sides. This is an incredibly quick and easy recipe to make. So you don't have to plan a bunch of time ahead of time. All you really need to do is make sure your eggs and butter are at room temperature, as well as any bananas you're using, and you are good to go. All right, final steps here. We still have 2 bananas we have to go ahead and add in. And I just hand mash these. I reuse my butter bowl just because, let's face it, there's always a ton, so many dishes when baking. And if I can just save myself even one, it makes me feel better. I know it doesn't matter, but it certainly makes me feel a ton better. So this, I use a fork, and I don't want to mash these completely. I like to have a little bit of texture left when I add it in. Now, maybe you don't like that. That's totally fine. You can completely pulverize these if you want. The reason I add these 2 at the end is I read a long time ago, cannot remember where, I mean probably 15 years ago, that there's a little bit more banana flavor in there and as well as kind of the fun bit of chunks by adding the remainder of your banana, boy, I'm having a heck of a time today, by adding the remainder of your bananas at the end. So, kind of looks like, I guess, banana mush, but this is usually what I go for. We're gonna go ahead and add this into our batter. We'll fold it in a minute. I fold it in together with our toasted pecans. So for our pecans, these definitely have cooled enough to handle easily. Now, we are not going to put them in whole like this. I have found, at least when I'm home baking, that breaking them up by hand works just as well as chopping, and maybe creates a little bit less of a mess. Plus, I like the idea of having a variety of sizes. Another trick that I learned from my mother is sometimes the skins of pecans can be a little bit on the bitter side. So I take this paper towel and I am grabbing the pecans by the handful. And while I am kind of smooshing them, I'm also rubbing some of the bitterness off the skins. I actually don't know if that's 100% true. Maybe someone else can tell me about the bitterness, but it's one of those things that my mom did, so now I do it. What I like about it is it helps me crush up my pecans so I don't have to chop them. But this is the residue that you get from some of the skin. I think it does help. You can be the judge and let me know. And I'll go ahead and then just so easily, once they're toasted, these things split apart so easily. Any of the ones that I didn't get while I was rubbing the skin off, I'm gonna go ahead and do by hand. Now you can toast your pecans. Sometimes if I know I'm gonna be baking for the weekend, I'll go ahead and toast a bunch of pecans ahead of time, and then you can keep them at room temperature, covered up in a bowl, and they'll be just fine. You know, for instance, if I'm making German chocolate cake, I always toast my pecans and my coconut ahead of time. That way it's just one less step that you have to do. But I wanted to make sure to show the reality of the process from beginning to end when you do it all in one go. Sometimes it's a spur of the moment decision to make banana bread. All right, here we go. These will get folded in. This is what we've got. Now, I try not to overfold. Again, you don't want to overmix your batter, but you want to make sure that every piece will have at least a somewhat equal amount of banana texture and toasted pecans. Okay. I think we might be ready. Here we go. It's as simple as that. Now, for the final step, let's talk pans. When I am baking banana bread, I actually use mini loaf pan, just like this. You can use a traditional loaf pan. I'll do that every now and then. You can use a muffin tin. Whatever you got, use it. Just feel free to bake it. The mini loaf pan it's kind of a little more fun. And sometimes it keeps an individual piece from drying out. I don't know, personal preference. We're gonna go ahead and use the mini loaf pan today. So I will always spray it with some non-stick spray. And you, of course, can pre-prep this however you like. Then the cavities are gonna get filled, and I just do this by hand using my rubber spatula, about 3/4 of the way full. You can make them bigger, a little bit bigger if you want, or a little bit smaller. Give you just an example here. So we're gonna fill it up just about like this. Then once these are all filled, I'm gonna pop it in the oven, which has been preheating at 350 degrees. These will take anywhere from probably 19 to 23 minutes. So I start checking them. I rotate them halfway through, but I will start checking them for doneness. Doneness, is that a word? Doneness. Around 20-21 minutes. So let's go ahead and get this going. the banana bread's been baking for about 10 minutes, so we're gonna check them, rotate the pan, and see where we're at. They're looking pretty good, about where I want them to be. I'm gonna guess maybe another 10 to 12 minutes. We'll go ahead and let these keep browning up nicely. It's starting to smell pretty good in here. Banana bread has been baking for about 20 minutes. We're gonna check to see if it needs a little bit more time. Let's take a look. This is where we are so far. Don't want to let all the heat out of my oven. So I think these are probably going to need a little, maybe 3 minutes or so. You want them to be nicely, fairly evenly browned on top and bounce back when you touch them. Here we go. Okay, the banana breads have now been in there maybe about 24 minutes. So I think it's time to take them out. Let's see. Okay, I think they're looking pretty good. Fairly evenly browned. They've started pulling away from the edges just a bit. So I think we're good. We're gonna go ahead and let these cool in the pan for about 5 minutes. Then we'll take them out, let them cool completely to room temperature on a rack, and then we'll talk about how to go ahead and store them. But before that, of course, we'll do a taste test. I use a butter knife to help get these mini loaves out of the pan and onto a rack so they can cool to room temperature. Okay, I think our banana bread is ready to try. It has been cooling on the rack for about 20 minutes and it's pretty close to being room temperature. So let's take a look at it. Nice and evenly brown, nice crusts. So this is probably what will happen in your kitchen. You cannot keep them on a plate in here, clearly. And like I said before, it's my husband's absolute favorite morning treat. So how about we try this again? Show you what it looks like in the middle. Yeah, there's that banana bread look you're looking for, and it's packed full of toasted pecans, if that's something that you like in your banana nut bread or banana bread. Let's give it a try. It is packed full of banana flavor. I think you're really gonna like this. And like I said before, great to put in lunches. You can wrap them up individually. I sometimes will keep them in a Tupperware container like this, just on the counter, so my husband can grab them on his way to work. They'll keep at room temperature for several days, or you can wrap them up, put them in a Ziploc bag, and pop them in the freezer, and take them out whenever you feel like having a piece of banana bread. So, thanks so much for baking with me today, and I hope you enjoy the recipe. Bye.